Welcome back, everyone. This is Mr. Darkveil. Today we're covering 11 of the most disturbing true trucker stories ever sent in to this channel. Truckers sent these in, and these aren't campfire inventions. Too specific, too consistent, too unsettling to dismiss. We cross-checked the details, and they line up with dispatch logs and highway patrol reports. Tonight, a CB radio that starts repeating words a driver never said out loud. A hitchhiker who's bone dry in a downpour and gives directions down a road that's been closed for a decade, and something that paces a rig for nearly 50 miles through a windswept gorge without ever fully stepping into the light. And that's just the beginning. 11 drivers, 11 routes, 11 nights they still can't explain. Subscribe, turn the bell on, because this channel is about real, patient horror instead of cheap scares. Share your own story in the comments. Your experience could be the next one we bring to light. Kill the dome light. Let's begin. 31 years, I've hauled freight up and down the I-5 corridor and every spur road that feeds into it. And in all that time, I've never had patience for ghost stories. Guys in this business love to talk. Every truck stop's got its story. Every rest area's got its legend. And I've rolled my eyes at every single one of them at some diner counter or another. So take that for what it's worth when I tell you what happened out on 224, because I still don't have an explanation for it, and it's been sitting in my chest for a while now like something I swallowed wrong. It was late October, coming up on 2 in the morning, cold drizzle coming down sideways, the way it does along the Clackamas River corridor when the wind picks up off the water. I'd been on the road since Medford. Coffee, long gone cold in the cup holder, and my eyes were starting to lie to me, the way they do around hour 14. So I pulled into the rest area to get 30, 40 minutes of shut-eye before I killed somebody's kid by drifting into a guardrail. The lot was empty when I rolled in. Just my rig, engine ticking as it cooled, rain coming down on the hood and that steady hiss. Empty lot's not unusual out there at that hour. But something about it sat wrong with me the second I cut the engine, some low hum at the back of my skull, and I couldn't have told you what it was if you'd paid me. First strange thing happened before I even got out of the cab. My CB crackled, that little burst of static you get when somebody keys a mic without saying a word into it. Happens all the time on the road. Some trucker 3 counties over, bumping his handset by accident. No big deal normally. But it came through, right as I put the truck in park. Right at that exact second. Like whoever was on the other end had been watching my headlights swing into the lot and waited for me to stop moving. I sat with my hand on the door, thinking about that for a second longer than I needed to, then told myself I was tired and being stupid, and went in to use the restroom. I've stopped at that particular building probably 200 times over the years. Same route, same schedule, year in and year out. I know it the way you know your own kitchen in the dark, where the light switch is before you even reach for it. And when I walked in, the far stall, the one closest to the window, was shut. That doesn't sound like much, I know, but that door's been broken for as long as I can remember, hangs open on its own weight, the latch stripped out years back, and I've never once in 200 stops seen it closed all the way. I stood there looking at it longer than a grown man ought to stand looking at a bathroom door, feeling stupid about it even as I did it. I went to the sink to splash some water on my face, and the far faucet was running. Nobody there. Nobody'd been there. Not that I could see. Not that the dry floor around the basin showed. Those are the push-button kind. They run maybe 8, 10 seconds and shut themselves off automatic. This one just kept going, steady, like somebody had their palm under it. I reached over and pushed it myself to make it stop, and that's when I heard the breathing. It was coming from behind that shut door, slow, heavy, wet-sounding, like a man with something caught low in his chest. My first thought, my honest first thought, standing there dripping water off my chin, was pipes, was some old vent knocking around in the wall, because that's the kind of thing you tell yourself at 2 in the morning alone in a rest stop bathroom in the middle of nowhere. But pipes don't breathe in rhythm. That sound had a pace to it, in and out, in and out. The pace of a living thing trying to keep quiet and not quite managing it. That's when I remembered, out of nowhere, a story a driver named Purdy told me at a diner in Woodburn. Maybe 2 years back, one of those stories I'd waved off at the time. Said a fella he knew picked up a hitchhiker on this same stretch of river road. Some kid standing in the rain with a duffel bag, and the kid asked to be let out at a rest stop to use the can. Said he'd be right back. Driver waited 20 minutes, went in to check on him, found nothing. No kid, no duffel bag, stalls all empty. Only exit was the one door. I remember laughing at Purdy, telling him he'd been reading too many of those internet forums the young guys pass around. Wasn't laughing standing there with wet hands and cold water running down my collar. The lights dipped then, just for a second. That brownout flicker you get when a transformer somewhere takes a hit from a storm, or a line sways in the wind and touches something it shouldn't. I told myself that's all it was. Told myself out loud even. My own voice sounding strange and small bouncing off the tile. I pulled my phone out of habit, wanting to just hear it buzz, see a bar of signal, something normal, and there was nothing. No bars. Which happens out there plenty. That corridor's got dead spots you could lose a small town in. No surprise there. But it made the walls feel closer than they had a minute before. I decided I was done washing my face. Walking back toward the door, I glanced down through the window at the gravel apron out front, wet and dark from the drizzle, catching what little light spilled out from the building, and there was one clean set of boot prints pressed into it, leading up toward the entrance. Big prints, deep in the heel, the way a heavy man walks. Nothing leading away from them, just my own prints circling my rig where I'd parked, and that one line coming in and stopping, like whoever made it walked through the door and never walked back out. I stood in that doorway a good while, rain misting sideways across my face, running numbers in my head that didn't add up no matter how I turned them. And that's when I thought about Dale Emmerich for the first time in probably 15 years. Dale ran team routes out of the same yard I did back in the 90s. Good driver, steady guy, 3 kids, and a wife named Carol, who used to send cookies out with him on the long hauls. One November, he stopped at a rest area outside Ashland for a break, same as any other night, and he was never heard from again. Truck sat there running for 6 hours before anybody found it. Company put it out that he probably just walked off the job. People do that sometimes. Midlife thing, new start somewhere. I never bought that story, not for one day. Dale wasn't the walking off kind. Standing in that lot on 224 with the cold running down my collar, his name came back to me clear, as if somebody'd said it out loud in my ear. I made myself move then, made myself walk out toward the edge of the gravel where the light gave out and the tree line started, because something in me needed to look, needed to know there wasn't a man standing out there in the drizzle watching me, the way that breathing had made me feel watched. And that's where my boot caught on something half sunk in the mud at the edge of the gravel. I bent down without really wanting to, and pulled it free, and it was a wallet, or what was left of one, the leather gone soft and dark with years of weather, the stitching rotted through on one side. I don't know why I opened it. I wish now I hadn't. There was a laminated card inside, cracked down the middle, water warped, but I could still make out the logo on it, a freight company logo I hadn't seen on a truck door in probably 20 years, because they went under, not long after Dale disappeared. And under the logo, faded, but legible if you tilted it, right under what light there was, a name, Emmerich, D. I don't know how long I crouched there in the mud, holding that thing, long enough for the cold to work all the way into my knees. I want to tell you I've got some clean explanation, that it was somebody else's wallet, a coincidence, a common enough name, but I've run freight long enough to know when something's sitting wrong in my gut, and this was sitting about as wrong as anything's ever sat. That's when the handle on that stall door rattled. From the inside. Hard. Like somebody testing it, wanting out, or wanting me to know for certain they were there, and had been the whole time I was standing in the mud, 50 feet away, holding a dead man's wallet, and I was the only living soul supposed to be in or around that building. I dropped the wallet. I'm not ashamed to say it. I walked to my truck fast, not quite running, but close to it, boots slipping in the wet gravel, and when I got to the cab, the driver's door was standing open about 6 inches, which I know for a fact I did not leave it, because I remember pulling it shut behind me, out of 30 years of habit, before I ever walked toward that building. I climbed up, slammed it, locked it, sat there with the engine going for a solid minute before my hands would work the wheel right. Pulling out of that lot, I checked my mirror out of some stupid old reflex, the kind you can't help even when part of you doesn't want to look, and the restroom light was burning steady over that far stall, same as it had been the whole time, like it had never flickered once. And for just a second, 1 second, in the dark past the edge of that light, I thought I saw a shape standing at the tree line, where I'd been crouched a minute before. Could have been a fence post, could have been nothing at all. I didn't slow down to find out. I called it in the next morning, told a state trooper about the wallet, about the name on that card, watched him write it down without much expression on his face, the way cops do when they've heard plenty of strange things and stopped being surprised by any of them. Never heard back what came of it. I've driven that route 100 times since that night, and I take the next exit down now, every single time. Rain or clear, tired or not. I tell myself it's just habit. I know better. I've hauled log trailers up Highway 30 out of Astoria for 6 years now, mostly the graveyard runs, 11 at night to 1 in the morning, when the fog rolls off the river and sits on the road like it's got nowhere else to be and no reason to leave. Before the Army, I never would have taken those hours. Nobody sane volunteers for the dead middle of the night on a 2-lane logging road with no shoulder to speak of, and grades that drop off into black timber on both sides. But after the Army, I asked for them specifically, and my dispatcher, an old guy named Pharaoh who'd been doing this since before I was born, just shrugged and gave me the keys. Convoy driving teaches you to like the dark when it's empty, and hate it when it's not. And for 6 years, that stretch of road stayed empty, in all the right ways. I knew every curve of it. I knew where the fog thickened first, right after the old mill turnoff, and where it thinned out again near the county line, like the road itself was breathing. The CB's mostly for the regulars. A guy named Pete, who runs feed out of Clatts Caney, talks about his knees the whole way, tells you about his grandkids whether you ask or not. A woman who never gives her handle, just hums between transmissions, so you know the channel's live, and somebody else is out there in the dark with you. There's a trucker who calls himself Ironhead who mostly complains about way stations. Ordinary noise, the kind that keeps you awake without asking anything of you. The kind that lets your mind drift half into autopilot while your hands stay on the wheel and your eyes stay on the fog line. I liked that channel. 6 years of it, and it never once gave me a reason to think twice. That night started the same as any of them. Cold enough that the heater in the cab was working overtime and still losing the fight against the window fog. Damp enough that I could smell the river even with the vents shut. That wet mineral smell that gets into your jacket and stays there till morning. I picked up the load at the yard outside Clatts Caney a little after 10. Empty trailer heading back down toward the mill near Astoria to pick up in the morning. And by 11, I was rolling south on 30, with nothing but my headlights carving a short tunnel, through the gray and the CB murmuring low beside me. Pete came on around 11:15, same as always, talking about a knee replacement his doctor kept pushing him toward. I gave him the usual back and forth, mile markers, a joke about how neither of us was getting any younger doing this. Somewhere in there, the humming woman keyed up for a few seconds, just enough to remind the channel she was alive out there too, and then went quiet again. Normal night. Fog thick enough that I had my brights off and my low beams doing what they could. Visibility maybe 60, 70 feet in the worst patches. The kind of driving where you go by memory as much as by sight. A new voice came on around 11:40. Said he was running empty back from a mill drop. Said he was maybe 10 minutes ahead of me on 30, heading the same direction. Introduced himself easy, unhurried, the way guys do when they've done this long enough that small talk over a radio doesn't take any effort. Said his name was Dale, or something close to it. I honestly don't remember exactly, because it didn't stick as important at the time. I didn't think twice about him. You get new voices on that channel, same as anywhere else. Truckers cycle through routes, pick up different runs, and a new handle on a familiar frequency is nothing. I keyed back, told him watch for a spot near the old mill road, where the fog gets bad fast, and he thanked me for it. Said he'd take it slow. We talked mile markers back and forth for a while after that, the way you do when there's nothing else to look at, just numbers passing under your tires, and a voice keeping you company through them, watching for deer, for downed branches that come loose in weather like this, for anything that might be standing in the road where the fog swallowed it whole 30 seconds before your headlights found it. 20 minutes in, maybe 25, I glanced at my odometer and my mile marker sign coming up through the gray, and I keyed up to tell him I was coming up on marker 41. Before I got the words out, before my thumb had even fully pressed the button down, he said it for me. Said the number clean, no hesitation. Said it like he was reading it straight off my dash, instead of guessing at where I might be on a road he claimed to be well ahead of. I sat with that a second, thumb still on the mic, engine humming under me, fog pressing against the windshield. I told myself he had a scanner, something picking up GPS chatter. I told myself trucking apps crosstalk sometimes, that dispatch systems bleed information between units on shared frequencies, that there was a reasonable, boring, mechanical explanation sitting right there if I just thought hard enough to find it. I spent a career finding the tactical explanation for a thing before it found me. Ambushes, equipment failures, radio silence that meant something was wrong. 3 clicks up the road. You learn to reason your way to safety fast, because hesitation gets people hurt. And I couldn't find one here. That's the part that actually put a chill through me, more than the coincidence itself. Not that he knew the marker, the absence of any way for him to know it. I keyed back anyway, kept my voice level, asked him straight out how he'd guessed that so close. He laughed. Easy. Said something about doing this route long enough that he just had a feel for it. Could clock a trucker's pace by the sound of their engine over the radio. It was a good answer. Reasonable. The kind of answer that should have put it to rest. It didn't. Something in the timing of it sat wrong in my chest, low and quiet, the way it does right before you understand a mission's gone sideways, before anybody's said a word to confirm it. Just a shift in the air that your body catches before your brain does. I kept driving because that's the job, because 6 years on that road had taught me that fog plays tricks, and nerves play tricks worse, and the only thing you can trust out there is the wheel in your hands and the white line at the edge of your headlights. He kept talking, easy and unbothered, telling me about a diner up near Clatskanie that stayed open late, asking if I'd ever stop there. I answered him short, and somewhere past marker 44, in the middle of a sentence about coffee, he mentioned my thermos, said it was the green one, said it was sitting low, said I kept it wedged between the seat and the door, same as I always did on every run. I looked down without meaning to, some reflex older than thought, and it was sitting exactly where he said, dented cap catching the dashboard light, wedged in that same gap I'd wedged it into 1,000 times, without ever once mentioning it to another living soul. I felt my hands go tight on the wheel, in a way they hadn't gone tight in years, not since a night in another country I don't talk about much anymore. I checked my mirrors, slow and deliberate, the way you're trained to check a perimeter, looking for a second set of headlights. Anybody close enough behind me to have eyes on my cab through the back window. Anybody who could have seen a green thermos and a woman's hand reaching for it. There was nothing back there. No lights, no shapes. Nothing but fog rolling in the wake of my own trailer, closing back up behind me like water. I checked ahead too, for the taillights he claimed to have. 10 minutes up the road, same as he'd said at the start. Nothing there either. Just the fog and the yellow line disappearing into it, 30, 40 feet at a time. I stopped answering him for a while after that. Just drove, both hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, breathing slow, the way you learn to when your pulse wants to run ahead of you. I started counting mile markers in my head, instead of saying them out loud, thinking to myself, deliberately, clearly, I'm not giving him anything else, holding that thought tight, turning it over, like a fact I needed to believe, like if I built the wall high enough in my own skull, nothing could get over it. And he said it back to me, word for word, the exact sentence, in my own rhythm, same pause where I'd paused, same flat certainty I'd said it with in my own head, like he'd been standing behind my eyes the whole time, reading it as I built it, letter by letter, before I ever thought to speak it aloud. My stomach dropped the way it does on a bad grade with no brakes. I didn't say anything back. I couldn't have gotten a word out even if I'd wanted to. And then the channel dropped. Not static. I know static. 6 years of it. That soft hiss that fills a dead channel, like white noise filling an empty room. This wasn't that. It was a silence with a weight to it. A texture, like the whole channel had been switched off from somewhere that wasn't my dash, somewhere outside the reach of any knob or dial I had control over. My CB sat there, glowing its usual green, channel light on, everything working exactly the way it was supposed to work, and it gave me nothing back, not even the hiss. I drove the rest of that stretch in a silence I put there myself, radio still on, just nobody left to answer. I didn't touch the dial. I didn't try another channel. I just watched the fog, and the mile markers, and the green thermos, wedged where it always sat, and I didn't say one more word out loud for the rest of that run, not even to myself, not even in my head if I could help it. I still run that stretch of 30. Same hours, same fog, same mile markers ticking by under the same tired headlights. I just don't turn the radio on anymore. Pharaoh asked me about it once, why I stopped checking in on channel, and I told him the CB's acting up. That's not true. It works fine. I've tested it plenty of times, sitting in the yard in broad daylight. Key it up. Get Pete's voice back clean as anything. It's not the radio. It's that stretch of road at that hour, in that fog. And I'd rather drive it in silence than find out what else it already knows about me before I've said it. 3 weeks into owning my truck outright, and I still couldn't walk past it in a parking lot without turning around to look at it, like it belonged to somebody else, and I was just borrowing their pride for a minute. 26 years old, upside down on a loan that was going to outlive my 20s, and maybe my 30s too, and somehow prouder of that beat-to-hell Freightliner than anything I'd ever owned in my life. I'd bought it off a guy retiring out of Medford, 340,000 miles on it already, a crack in the windshield I kept meaning to get fixed, and a CB radio older than I was. Didn't matter. First time in my life, my name was on the title of something bigger than a Honda Civic, and I drove it like a man who'd just discovered he had legs. Dispatch called me on a Tuesday afternoon and offered up a run through Santiam Pass, Highway 20, a load of rough-cut lumber heading out to a yard in Bend. Told me straight up it was a solo route, no team driver, nobody in the sleeper if something went sideways. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. See, I'd done team driving for almost 2 years before this. Always somebody up front with me, or crashed out in the back. Always somebody to laugh at the deer, or bitch about the weather with. This was going to be my first real solo pass run. My first time being the only person responsible for a rig on a mountain road, and I wanted it bad. Wanted to prove to myself I could do the job without training wheels. Late September in the Cascades, and that afternoon the first snow of the season had come down light and quiet, just a dusting on the higher ground. Not enough to need chains, but enough to make the asphalt shine black and wet under my headlights, instead of the dull gray you get in summer. I hit the base of the grade right around dusk, that stretch of Highway 20, where the trees close in tight on both sides, ponderosa pine, and fir packed so dense you couldn't see 10 feet past the tree line, even with your brights on. Dusk out there doesn't linger. It's daylight. Then it's a kind of blue nothing. And then it's just dark. Full mountain dark. The kind where your headlights are the only proof the world still exists past your hood. I had the radio going, some classic rock station out of Salem that was already breaking up into static the higher I climbed. And I was tapping the wheel and grinning like an idiot at nobody, because for the first time in my life, I felt like a real trucker, instead of a guy playing dress-up in his dad's old canvas jacket. I remember thinking about texting my girlfriend when I hit a signal again. Something like, "First solo mountain run. Wish me luck." Some corny thing like that. I was that far from thinking anything was wrong. I want you to understand that, because it matters later, how normal that first hour felt, how boring in the best possible way. Around mile marker 60-something, I didn't clock the exact number that first time, which I regret now. My headlights caught something standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 20, 25 yards off the shoulder. I clocked it the way you clock anything out there that time of year. Filed it under elk before my brain had even finished processing the shape. Big animal, dark coat, standing still at the edge of the trees, the way elk do when they're deciding whether your truck is worth spooking over. I actually eased off the pedal a little, not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to hit the thing, and because some part of me wanted a better look. I was already thinking about that text to my girlfriend, adding a line about seeing wildlife on my big grown-up solo run. Except elk don't stand up. Elk go from 4 legs to running, maybe 4 legs to a stiff little trot if they're startled. But this thing went from down on all 4s to upright in one motion, and it did it wrong. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't the motion of an animal I knew the shape of. It rose up, like it had joints in places. Joints don't usually sit, like the middle of it hinged, somewhere. A spine doesn't hinge, and it was tall, taller than made any sense, standing next to those trees. Trees that had to be pushing 60, 70 feet themselves. And then, before I'd even fully registered what I was looking at, it was gone, back into the black between the trunks. Gone that fast, like it had never been standing there in my lights at all. I did what anybody does. I told myself it was a bear. Black bears stand up on their hind legs all the time. I've seen the videos. My buddy Danny sent me one last year of a bear standing up in some guy's backyard in New Jersey, like a tourist, checking out the view. Bears stand up. That's a normal thing bears do. I turned the radio up a notch, more static than song at that point, and I kept my hand steady on the wheel and kept driving, feeling pretty good about how quick I'd talked myself down. That's when I noticed it hadn't left. It wasn't behind me. It wasn't off doing whatever a spooked bear does after a truck rattles past. It was pacing me, level with my door, moving through timber, so dense a deer couldn't thread through it clean at a dead run, and I was doing 55 on wet asphalt with a loaded trailer behind me. I'd catch pieces of it in the gaps between trunks, a dark shape holding steady with my cab. No stumbling over deadfall, no slowing down at the thick spots where the undergrowth got heavy, just gliding through, like the forest wasn't an obstacle for it, the way it would be for literally anything else that size. I sped up, bumped it to 60, 62, pushing it on a grade I had no business pushing loaded lumber on, and it stayed with me. I slowed down to see if it would pass me, or fall behind, dropped to 45, and it slowed too, like it was reading my speedometer through the trees. 4 miles of that. I know it was 4 miles, because somewhere around the second one, my hands had started shaking bad enough that I grabbed onto counting mile markers, just to have something to do, besides think. Green reflective signs flashing past in my peripheral. 64, 65, 66. And counting felt like doing something, instead of just sitting there with my jaw locked so tight it ached. Both hands white on the wheel, radio forgotten, static forgotten, just me, and the sound of my own breathing, and the diesel engine, and whatever the hell was keeping pace with me. In trees. A grown man couldn't have walked through at a jog. Somewhere in there, my brain started doing the thing where it tries to make a joke out of terror, because that's easier than sitting in it. I remember thinking, real clear, well, this is either the best story of your life or the last one, and almost laughing. This awful dry laugh that didn't have anything funny behind it. First solo run. 3 weeks, owning the truck. I remember thinking about the loan, of all things, thinking I hadn't even made my second payment yet, and here I was, maybe about to die on a mountain pass with lumber in the back. Then the trees broke. There's a straightaway up near the summit. I know it now like the back of my hand. But that night I didn't know it was coming, and the tree line pulled back just enough that my high beams could reach further down the road than they had in miles. And it wasn't beside me anymore. It was in the road, dead center of my lane, maybe 80 yards out, lit up full and complete in my high beams, like it had been waiting its whole life for exactly that stretch of open pavement. I remember my foot easing off the gas without me deciding to do it, my body doing math faster than my head could keep up with, brakes coming on smooth, because some animal part of my brain knew that slamming them on wet pavement with a full trailer was its own kind of death sentence. And it didn't run. That's the part that still gets me at 3 in the morning some nights. It didn't bolt for the tree line. the way every single living thing does when a semi's high beams hit it. It stood there. It looked at me. I don't remember a face. I want to be honest about that. I've had months to think about it, and I still couldn't draw you a face. I just remember the wrongness of how still it held itself. Something that size, that tall, just standing there in the middle of a highway holding dead still, while 40,000 pounds of truck and lumber closed the distance on it. I was maybe 50 yards out, foot still easing off, not screaming, not even breathing, I think, just watching this thing fill up my windshield. And then my high beams were lighting up empty, wet asphalt. No dive for the ditch. No blur at the edge of the frame. No sound. Nothing. There, and then not. Like somebody had cut it out of the world with a knife. I did not stop the truck. I want to be clear about that, because everybody asks me that first. Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you get out and look? And the answer is, I have read enough trucker forums and heard enough stories from old guys at truck stops to know you do not stop on that stretch of road for anything that isn't a badge and a flashlight. I kept the truck moving, slow, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel steady in my lane. And somewhere past the summit, I finally got a signal on the CB again, and I keyed the mic and said something to whoever was out there listening, my voice cracking in a way that embarrassed me even in the moment. Mentioned what I'd seen, half expecting to get laughed off the channel by every trucker between here and Bend. Instead, some old boy running reefer, calm as anything, just came back with, "Yeah, that's the 71 stretch. Everybody's seen it eventually." Said it the way you'd mention a pothole that's been there for years, something the county just never got around to fixing. Like it was infrastructure. Like it was just part of the road now, filed away next to the way stations and the runaway truck ramps. A known hazard nobody talks about until you've got your own story to trade. I checked my dash cam that night in a truck stop outside Sisters, sitting in the cab with the engine off and my hands still not fully steady, scrolling back to find the footage. The file for those 4 minutes wouldn't open. Corrupted, the app said, right there in red letters. No explanation. Nothing. Everything before it played fine. Everything after it played fine. Just that stretch. Gone. Like the camera had decided on its own. It hadn't seen anything worth keeping. I still run that pass. Dispatch keeps sending me up through Santiam. Because I never told anybody not to. Because what am I gonna say? Because a guy 3 weeks into owning his truck doesn't exactly get to turn down routes. But I don't idle through it anymore. Not even to check my mirrors or grab a sip of coffee. I keep my speed up the whole way through. And I don't look at the tree line. Not once. Not even when something moves in it, which it has. Twice more since. And I always know exactly what mile marker I'm on. You want this on camera, huh? All right. I got nothing else going on till my hours reset anyway. So sit there and point that thing wherever. I ain't gonna perform for it. So this was back in January, the bad stretch of it. And I'm running 138, out toward Diamond Lake around 3 in the morning, which nobody with sense does, unless they're getting paid for it. Black ice the whole corridor, that glassy kind you can't even see under your lights until you're already on it. I've run that road for 20-some years. I know every bend of it past Steamboat, past Tokatee. I could probably drive it with my eyes shut, which is not a joke I'd make out loud to my dispatcher. About 40 minutes in, another semi gets on my tail. Not unusual by itself, plenty of night haulers on that route. What was unusual was how close he sat. I mean right up under my mud flaps, in conditions where you're supposed to leave 4-5 seconds minimum. I figured he'd back off once he saw my brake lights flicker, or he'd swing out and pass when the lane opened up past Susan Creek. He did neither, just sat there, miles of that. I flashed my brakes a couple times, the polite way of saying, "Get off me," and nothing changed. So I keyed the CB, gave a standard call, told him he had room to pass whenever he wanted it. Dead air. Not even static rolling through, just nothing, like the channel had gone soft. That part I probably would have forgotten if what came after made sense. I got annoyed enough to back my own speed down to about 40, figuring I'd force his hand, make him either pass me or back off proper. He matched me, slowed the exact same amount, like we were tied together with a rope. Now, that's not something a driver does by accident. You don't casually match another truck's deceleration to the mile per hour on ice like that. That's the first thing that actually caught in my chest a little, if I'm honest, which I try not to be on camera. Eventually there's a passing lane before the Tokati turnoff, and he finally eases up alongside me. I glance over, mostly to give him a look, the kind you give a guy who's been riding your bumper for 20 miles. And here's the thing. No plate. No DOT number stenciled on the door. No company name. No unit number. Nothing. Just a blank white door panel lit up under my spot. Now I told myself, bootleg rig, somebody running without proper markings, wouldn't be the first time. Told myself that pretty firm. Actually, like I was trying to convince somebody. He doesn't pull ahead, just holds even with me for a stretch. Which again, nobody does, because that's the position with the worst visibility for both drivers. Then he drops back and tucks right behind me again, same distance as before, like he'd never left. Somewhere past Steamboat, I get 1 bar of signal, snap a photo back through my side mirror, mostly just to have something to show dispatch. Didn't think much of it till later that night, at the truck stop, when I pulled the picture up. Windshields lit up fine in the shot. Cab looks empty. I told myself the flash washed him out. Glare off the glass, whatever. I still haven't deleted that photo. I also haven't looked at it since. Little while after, an old boy on the CB, different truck, different direction, comes through clear as day and says something like, "Careful on 138 tonight," and I ask careful of what, and he just goes, "You'll know," and that's it. Gone. Out of range, I guess. I've been running that road a long time and never heard a warning like that from anybody, not once. Then under the overpass by the old mill road, somebody's headlights coming the other way, threw light straight into his cab for maybe half a second. Long enough. Driver sitting there, hands up on the wheel, and when the road bent, I watched for him to turn his head to check his mirror, the way you do on a curve like that. Everybody does it without thinking. He didn't. His head stayed dead center. Not stiff exactly, just still, like a mannequin somebody'd propped up behind the wheel. I told myself I was tired. 3 in the morning does that. I've hallucinated deer that weren't there before, so I let it sit. I hit the pull-off past Eagle Rock. Figured I'd let him go on by for good. He slowed down too, idled right at the mouth of the pull-off without turning in. Engine note flat and steady the whole time. No rise and fall, no rattle. Nothing an engine actually does when it's idling cold on a grade like that. Sat there a good 15, 20 seconds. That's the point I stopped telling myself stories about bootleg rigs. When he finally rolled forward again, I caught the cab in my mirror one more time. And I swear there were 2 shapes in there now. Driver, and something in the passenger seat that hadn't been there the first 4 times I'd looked. Could have been a jacket on a hook. I've said that to myself more times than I want to admit. Coming up on what should have been the Glide Junction, I passed a green exit sign, reflective, standard state issue, numbered for an exit I have never once seen in over 2 decades on that road. I know every exit on 138, the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. That number doesn't exist on any DOT map I've ever pulled up, and that's where he went. Signaled, if you can believe that. Still no plate, still no name on the door, and took that exit clean, lights swinging off into whatever was back there. I watched in my mirror for his taillights to show up on that ramp, the way they should for a few more seconds at least, given the angle. They just weren't there. Not fading, not distant, just not there. I called it into dispatch the next morning. Told them I wanted a note in the file, and I checked the county maps myself later that week at a rest stop with Wi-Fi. No exit at that mile marker. Never has been. So that's it. That's the whole thing. Probably a bad flashlight, bad tires, bad sleep. Take your pick. I've been doing this 30 years. I've seen worse things turn out to be nothing at all. I'm not saying it was anything. I'm just saying I take a different road now, when I've got a choice. And I don't run 138 after midnight anymore if I can help it. And that's really all there is to say about it. So you can turn that thing off now. You want the long version now? Fine. Grab a chair, I guess. And don't expect me to slow down and repeat myself. I already told this once, and I don't love telling it twice. So this was January. The bad stretch. The kind of cold where the state trucks are out at midnight laying salt. and it still doesn't do a damn thing, because the ice forms back over it in 20 minutes. I'm running 138 out past Steamboat toward Diamond Lake, 3 in the morning, hauling a load I don't even remember now, and I want to be real clear about something before I get into the meat of it. I've run that corridor for over 20 years. North Umpqua, all the bends past Tokatee, the drop by Eagle Rock. I know that stretch of road the way you know the hallway to your own bathroom in the dark. I'm not a guy who spooks easy. I've hit deer, I've hit black ice bad enough to jackknife and pray. I've had guys pull guns on me at truck stops over parking spots. So when I tell you this thing got under my skin, understand that's not nothing, coming from me. About 40 minutes into that run, headlights show up behind me. Another semi, and he's close. Way closer than anybody runs on ice. Maybe 2 car lengths back, which on a dry summer highway is stupid, and on black ice is flat out suicidal for both of us. I figured he'd back off. Most guys do, once they clock how bad the road is. Once they feel their own trailer start to drift a little on a curve. And remember, they're not invincible. He didn't back off. Sat there, mile after mile. That same distance, like he was tied to my bumper with a cable. I flashed my brakes at him twice, which any trucker knows means back up, buddy, you're riding too close. Nothing changed. I got on the CB, gave him the standard courtesy call, told him the lane was his whenever he wanted it. No hard feelings, just come on around. And I got nothing back. Not static, not somebody keying up and not talking, not even that hiss you get when a channel's open. Just quiet, like the radio itself had gone soft and stopped trying. I remember thinking that was odd enough to mention to dispatch later, and then getting annoyed at myself for even noting it. Because who cares if a guy's radio's broken? So I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is play games on ice. And I eased off my speed, dropped down to maybe 40, 45, figuring I'd force him to either pass me or hang back further. And here's where it stopped being ordinary annoyance for me. He matched it. Exact same drop, same moment, like our trucks were geared together. You don't do that by accident on ice. You especially don't do that if you're paying attention to your own truck, because matching another driver's deceleration like a mirror means you're not watching your own wheels, you're watching him. And nobody watches another driver that close for that long unless something's wrong with them or they're up to something. And both those thoughts sat with me a while. Eventually the road opens into a passing lane before the Tokatee turnoff, one of maybe 3 good passing stretches on that whole highway, and he finally eases up alongside me instead of passing clean through the way you're supposed to. I glance over, mostly just to give the guy a look. You know, the kind that says you've been riding my bumper for 20 miles, pal. And that's when I saw it. No plate, no DOT number stenciled anywhere on the door, no company markings, no fleet number, nothing. Just a blank white panel lit up under my spotlight, clean as a sheet of paper. Now I told myself, all right, bootleg operation, some guy running without proper paperwork, wouldn't be the first one I've seen. I told myself that pretty firmly, actually. The way you tell yourself something when a smaller part of you already isn't buying it. He didn't pull ahead once he was even with me. Just held there, matched my speed to the mile, sitting in the exact spot where neither of us had good visibility of the other, which is the one position on a highway nobody holds voluntarily, because it's the most dangerous seat there is. Then, without speeding up or dropping back gradual the way a normal driver would, he just slid back into position behind me again. Same following distance as before, like he'd never left it at all. A little past Steamboat, I got 1 bar of signal on my phone, first in a while on that stretch, and I snapped a picture out my side mirror, mostly just to have something to show dispatch. Proof I wasn't making up some story about a tailgater. Didn't look at it right then, kept driving. When I finally pulled it up that night at the truck stop, the windshield in that photo was lit up clean under the flash. Headlights caught it dead on, and the cab looked empty. No shape behind the wheel at all. I told myself the flash washed him out. Glare off the glass. Angle was bad. Whatever excuse fit. I still got that photo on my phone. I have not looked at it since that night, and I'm not going to pretend that's not a little strange of me. Not long after that, another trucker comes through on the CB, different rig, heading the opposite direction, and out of nowhere, no context, he says something like, careful on 138 tonight. And I key up and ask careful of what? Man, what am I looking at? And all he says back is, you'll know. And then he's gone. Out of range, I guess. Or he just quit talking. 20-some years on that road, and I have never once gotten a warning like that from another driver. Truckers talk about weather, deer, ice patches, cops running speed traps. Nobody just says careful and leaves it hanging like that. Coming up under the overpass by the old mill road, somebody's headlights coming the other direction threw light straight across his windshield for maybe half a second. Just enough. Driver's sitting there, hands up on the wheel in the right spot, posture normal enough at a glance. But the road bends hard right after that overpass, and every driver, every single one, checks their mirror on a bend like that. It's automatic. You don't even think about doing it. He didn't turn his head at all. Not stiff, not slow, just still. Dead center. Like whatever was steering that truck didn't know it was supposed to look. I told myself I was tired. 3 a.m. on black ice does things to a man's eyes. I've seen deer that weren't there before. Shapes in the trees that turned out to be nothing but shadow and fatigue. So I let that one go, mostly. I pulled off into the rest area past Eagle Rock. Figured I'd just let him go on by for good. Wait him out. Whatever it took. He slowed down too, right along with me, and idled at the mouth of that pull-off without ever turning in himself. And I sat there listening to his engine, because you can't help but listen when you're parked that close to another rig. And it was wrong. Flat. No rise and fall to it. None of the little rattle and cough a diesel makes idling cold on a grade, which every one of them does. Every single truck I've ever run has some hitch in its idle in weather like that. His just sat there steady as a hum, like a recording of an engine instead of an actual one. 15, 20 seconds of that. That's the point, if I'm honest with you, where I stopped telling myself stories about bootleg rigs and started just watching, real quiet, real still, the way you go quiet around something you're not sure of yet. When he finally pulled forward again, I caught the cab one more time in my mirror, and there were two shapes in there now. Driver, and something low in the passenger seat that had not been there the first 4 or 5 times I'd looked over. Could have been a coat hung on a hook. Could have been a duffel bag propped up funny. I've told myself that more times than I care to admit, and it gets a little less convincing every time I say it. Coming up on where the glide junction should have been, I passed a highway exit sign, green, reflective, standard state issue, numbered clean like every other one on that route. Problem is, I have run that stretch of 138 for over 2 decades, and there is no exit at that mile marker. Never has been one. I know every exit on that road the way you know the furniture in your own living room, and that sign should not have existed. And that's where he went, signaled and everything. If you can believe a truck with no plate and no name bothering to use a turn signal, and he took that exit clean, taillights swinging off into whatever was back there past the tree line. I kept my eyes on my mirror the whole time, waiting for those taillights to keep showing for a few more seconds the way they should have, given the angle of that ramp. They just weren't there, not fading out gradual the way lights do when a truck pulls away and gets small. Just gone, like someone had cut them off at the switch. I called it in the next morning, had dispatch put a note in my file, just so there'd be a record somewhere besides my own head. Week later, I was at a rest stop with decent Wi-Fi, and I pulled every county road map I could find for that corridor. No exit at that mile marker. Never has been, according to every map, every survey, every record the state's got. So that's the whole thing, front to back. Probably bad tires. Probably a bad flashlight, and a worse night's sleep. Take your pick. I've had 30 years of nights that turned into nothing once the sun came up. I'm not telling you it was anything. I'm just telling you I take a different route now, when I've got the choice. And I don't run 138 much after midnight anymore, if I can help it. And that's really all I've got to say about it. So go on and turn that thing off. I've made this run more times than I can count. Eugene, to Klamath Falls, up through Oak Ridge, over Willamette Pass, down the other side, before the grade turns to soup. 10 years driving nights. 6 of those on this exact route. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times when freight was heavy, before harvest season. I know this road, the way you know the inside of your own mouth. Every dip, every place the guardrail's been replaced, after some idiot took the curve, too hot in July. So when the rain started turning to sleet, around mile marker 42, I wasn't worried. I've driven through worse with a full trailer and half a night's sleep in me. The wipers were keeping up. The heater was doing its job. I had coffee in the thermos, and a country station fading in and out the way it always does once you climb past the tree line. The first thing that snagged was small enough that I almost let it go. There's a cedar off the Schulard, just past a bend I take every single week, split clean down the middle by some old lightning strike, black and hollow on the inside, where the bark peeled back years ago. I passed it, thought nothing of it, kept my eyes on the white line disappearing into the gray ahead of me. 4 minutes later, maybe 5, that same split cedar came up on my right again. Same angle, same charred split lit up the same way in my headlights, same patch of exposed wood catching the light like a mouth caught mid-word. I remember actually laughing at myself, out loud, alone in the cab, thinking I'd gotten turned around somehow. Except there's nowhere on that stretch to turn around. It's a 2-lane climb, with a rock face on one side and a long drop on the other. Guardrail the only thing between you and it. You don't loop back on Willamette Pass by accident. You'd have to want to. I checked my dash clock out of habit, more than worry. 5:47. Ordinary enough. I checked it again, maybe a minute later, just glancing, and it still read 5:47. That's the kind of thing you dismiss the first time. Digital clocks, skip, glitch, whatever. But then I looked at my odometer, which I glance at more than I'd like to admit, because counting miles is half of what keeps a night driver sane, and it hadn't moved either. Not a tenth of a mile. I tapped the dash with 2 fingers, like that ever fixes anything, the way you'd knock on a stalled watch, and the numbers just sat there, unbothered, like they were waiting for me to stop looking. The radio was on low, some classic rock station out of Springfield, and it took me a strange amount of time to notice the DJ was repeating himself. Not the song. The talk break. Some line about a caller named Denise, winning tickets to a show in Eugene. His voice with that same little laugh, in the same place, over and over. 8 seconds, looping clean, with no static, no skip, no stutter you'd expect from bad reception on a mountain. I turned it up, thinking maybe I'd misheard, and got the same 8 seconds a third time, word for word, laugh for laugh, like the whole station had gotten stuck, the same way my clock had. That was when I keyed the CB and called it in, the way we're trained to when something's wrong with the truck. Calm, clipped, gave my location, said something felt off with my instruments, maybe electrical. Dispatch came back clean, no static at all, and the woman on the other end, Carol, who I've talked to 100 times, said, "You already checked in 2 minutes ago, hun. Same mile marker. Gave me the same thing about your instruments. You feeling all right out there?" I told her I hadn't called in. I know I hadn't. She read my own words back to me almost verbatim, and she said my voice had sounded steady both times. Normal, like nothing was happening. That's the piece that still gets me more than anything else that night. Not that I'd lost time, that some version of me had used it calmly, competently, exactly the way I'd have used it if I'd been fully there. Somewhere around then I saw the cedar a third time, and that's when the raindrop stopped me cold. I was watching the windshield, half out of nerves now, and there was a single drop of sleet sitting dead center in my sight line, right where the wiper should have swept it clear 2 passes ago. It hadn't moved, not slid down with gravity, not smeared, not frozen solid, the way ice sometimes does against warm glass. It just hung there, while the blade went back and forth past it, untouched, like it wasn't really sitting on the glass at all, like it was sitting on something behind the glass, a layer I couldn't reach. I've told people since that this was the moment my hands started shaking, but they didn't. Not then. I kept them steady on the wheel because that's what 30 years of my mother's voice in my head telling me to stay calm sounds like, and because panicking on a mountain grade with a loaded trailer gets people killed, mine included. I want to be honest about the next part, because it's the part nobody quite believes, including some days myself. In my mirror, just for a second. In that strange, stretched light sleet makes, when it catches your taillights, I thought I saw someone in the sleeper behind me. Not a shape exactly. More a sense of a face turned toward mine. In a cab I knew for a fact was empty, because I'd loaded that trailer myself in Eugene, and there'd been nobody riding with me since a rookie named Tio shadowed me back in March. I looked again, and there was nothing, just my duffel bag, and the curtain half drawn the way I always leave it. I've decided since that a mind under that kind of strain will hand you almost anything to make sense of what it can't otherwise explain, and I don't put much weight on it. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, because it did, whatever it was. Ahead of me, through the sleet, there were taillights for a stretch, red and steady, gaining distance the way traffic does on a grade. And then they weren't there anymore. No brake flash, no turnoff, nothing. Willamette Pass doesn't have side roads where those lights could have gone. I remember thinking, with a kind of dumb, calm logic that surprises me looking back, that whoever that was probably just crested the next rise faster than me. That's the story I told myself in the moment, and it's the story that let me keep both hands on the wheel and my foot steady on the pedal, instead of doing something that would have put me through the guardrail. Somewhere in all of that, I stopped being able to tell you what happened. Not blacked out, not asleep. Nothing so clean as that. Just gone. The way a page goes missing from the middle of a book you've already read start to finish, so you don't even notice the gap until someone points at the page number and asks where the rest of it went. The next thing I have, clear and whole, is the way station lights at the bottom of the pass, yellow and ordinary against the wet asphalt, and my dash clock, reading 7:52. 2 hours. Gone from the middle of a drive I could do with my eyes shut. My dispatch log, when I pulled it later, showed I'd called in twice more during that stretch. Evenly spaced. My own voice both times. Calm. Giving locations I have no memory of reaching. Describing weather conditions accurately. Once even joking with Carol about the sleet turning her radio reception to garbage, which she laughed at. My thermos, nearly full when I'd left my last stop in Oak Ridge, was empty and cold in the cup holder, like I'd been drinking from it steadily the whole 2 hours. The dash cam had recorded straight through. No gap in the file. No corruption. Timestamp continuous the whole way. When I played it back at a truck stop outside Klamath Falls, hands not quite steady anymore now that I had the privacy to let them shake. It was just the road. Sleet. The cedar passing once. Plain as anything. My hands on the wheel the entire time. My face lit faint by the dash lights. Calm. Watching the road like nobody in that cab was missing a single thing. I didn't say much about it for a few weeks. You don't, in this line of work, if you want dispatch to keep trusting you with routes. But I started asking around at truck stops along that corridor. Careful, offhand, the way you feel, out whether someone's going to think you're losing your mind, before you commit to the question. 2 other drivers, both older than me, both drivers I'd trust with my own rig, told me some version of the same story, without me prompting a single detail. A landmark doubling back on itself. A clock that quits. One of them, a woman named Ruth, who's been driving that pass for 20-some years, said she'd stopped keeping track of the hours she'd lost up there. Said the Union Safety Bulletin had a quiet file on it that never made it to any public report. Incidents logged going back over a decade, all clustered on the same 3-mile stretch. All missing roughly the same span of time, give or take a few minutes. I've got theories now, more than I did that night. Black ice and a fugue state, brought on by driver fatigue and monotony, which is the explanation any doctor would hand you first, and the one I'd hand a rookie, asking me the same questions. Some magnetic anomaly in that stretch of rock the old-timers talk about, low and half-joking, the kind of thing that shows up on geological surveys. Nobody outside the industry ever reads. A flaw in the dash cam's own clock that happened to sync up, coincidentally, with everything else going sideways that same hour. None of it explains the cedar, or the raindrop that refused to move, or the fact that whoever was driving my truck through those 2 missing hours sounded exactly like me, calm and competent, and entirely present, describing a version of that drive I have never once managed to remember living. I've been hauling freight on 101 for 6 years now, night runs mostly. Portland down to Astoria and back. And you learn the rhythm of that road until it stops feeling like a road and starts feeling like the inside of your own skull. The wipers going 1-2, 1-2. The hum under the floorboards. The green mile markers ticking by so steady you could set a watch to them if you were fool enough to need one. I know every diner, every way station, every spot where the shoulder narrows and makes your stomach drop a little, even when there's nothing wrong. That night in late October, none of it felt familiar. The rain wasn't background noise anymore. It was an event. It was coming down sideways in sheets that caught the headlights and turned them into something solid, something you could have leaned against. And I had the wipers maxed out and was still driving half on memory because I couldn't see 40 feet past the hood. My dad drove this same stretch for almost 30 years before his knees gave out. And one thing he drilled into me before I ever got my own rig was simple. Don't stop for people on 101 after dark. Not hitchhikers, not somebody waving you down with car trouble. None of it. He never gave me a long reason. He just said, "The forest holds on to things," and left it at that. The way men his age leave a lot of things at that. I'd mostly kept the rule. 6 years, and I think I'd broken it twice. Both times for stranded families with kids in the back seat. Both times fine. So when I came up on the Tillamook State Forest detour, the ugly stretch where the highway crew is always rescoring the shoulder because the drainage never holds, and I saw a shape standing right where the guardrail gives out into black tree line, I told myself I wasn't going to stop. I told myself that right up until I was already easing off the gas. He wasn't waving. That's the part that got me. Nobody just stands in a storm like that, arms loose, not even trying to flag anyone down, unless something in them has already given up on being helped. I've thought about that a lot since. I pulled the rig onto the shoulder, gravel and mud spitting up under the tires, hazards ticking against the rain, and I leaned across and popped the passenger door. He climbed up slow, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world despite the weather, said thanks in a voice that barely carried over the engine noise, and folded himself into the seat. That's when the first thing landed wrong, though it took me a good minute to actually place it, the way you know a note is off in a song before you can say which one. He wasn't wet, not damp at the collar, not dripping off his sleeves onto my seat covers, nothing. His jacket looked like it had come straight off a hanger, dry across the shoulders, dry down the front, like he'd been standing under a roof this whole time instead of out in a downpour that had my own jacket soaked through, just from the walk around the hood. I glanced over at him twice, and both times, I built myself a little story to explain it away. Maybe he'd been sheltering under the tree line, and only stepped out right as my headlights caught him. Maybe the angle of the rain had spared him somehow. You reach for the easy explanation first. That's just what a mind does when it doesn't want the hard one. And mine reached hard. We got moving again, tires hissing through standing water, and I tried the usual small talk you make with a stranger in your cab, partly out of habit, and partly because the silence in there had a weight to it I didn't like. "Where you headed? Rough night to be out walking. Get caught out here long?" He answered maybe 6 words total across all of it. Short, flat, not unfriendly exactly, just somewhere else. I noticed his hands were folded in his lap the whole time. Still, like a man in a waiting room. I noticed he never once looked at the radio when I turned it up to fill the quiet. Never flinched when the station dissolved into a wash of static for about 10 seconds, right around the old ranger station turnoff. Static that cleared up on its own, like it had never happened. Then, with no lead-up at all, he said he needed the mill road. Told me it plain, like giving directions to a gas station. I laughed a little, more out of nerves than anything, and told him straight up, that road's been closed going on 10 years now, gated at both ends, grown over enough that the county stopped even bothering to maintain the gate. He didn't laugh back. He just said turn right past the second culvert, then follow it up past where the guardrail used to be. Used to be, present tense would have been strange enough, since that road barely qualifies as a road anymore, but past tense on a piece of missing guardrail he had no way of knowing about, stopped my breath for a second. I hadn't said a word about any guardrail. I don't think I'd even thought about that stretch of missing rail in years. Not since I was a teenager, riding up there with friends we shouldn't have been riding anywhere with. I grew up around here, And there's a story about that road that comes out every hunting season at the diner in Elsie, told a little differently, by every uncle and every regular at the counter, but the bones of it never change. Back in the 90s, a truck went off that bridge, in weather not too far off from what I was driving through that night. Driver was never found, not the body, not so much as a boot. The county closed the bridge afterward, and the road behind it not long after that, and the official reason on paper was structural, deterioration, liability, all the words a county puts on a form. But the reason everybody actually tells you, the reason that gets lower voices and a look toward the window, is that 2 separate search parties went up that road looking for the missing driver in the weeks after, and neither of them came back whole. One man walked out 3 days later saying he couldn't remember anything past the second culvert. The other pair, they were never found either. I hadn't thought about any of that in years, and now I had a man sitting in my cab, bone dry in a hurricane, giving me turn-by-turn directions to a road that shouldn't exist on any map printed in the last decade. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just kept driving, both hands tight on the wheel, heart going harder than the engine under the hood. The temperature in the cab had dropped, or it felt like it had, enough that I reached over and checked the heater dial, even though I knew I hadn't touched it. Somewhere past the second bend, headlights catching nothing but rain and black trunks of trees, I turned my head to ask him something, anything, just to hear a voice, and break whatever had settled over that cab. And in turning, I caught his reflection in the side glass, laid over the black tree line rushing past outside. In the window, he was facing forward, hands still folded in his lap, same as he'd been the whole ride. In the seat, close enough that I could have reached out and touched his shoulder. He had already turned his head and was looking straight at me, eyes open, waiting, like he'd been watching me for longer than made any sense. 2 versions of the same man, half a beat out of sync, like the glass hadn't caught up yet to what was actually sitting beside me. I looked back at the road so fast my neck ached from it. I didn't glance at him again, not once, not even at the edges of my vision. I drove another 11 miles without a single word passing between us, both hands locked on the wheel, rain hammering the roof, and every mile marker along that stretch felt longer than the one before it. When the gas station lights near Elsie finally came up out of the dark, that dull orange glow I've probably driven past 1,000 times without a second thought, I pulled in like it was the last dry ground on earth. I put the truck in park, took one steadying breath, and turned to tell him this was as far as I could take him. The seat was empty. Belt still buckled across nothing. The door hadn't opened. Not once. I'd have felt the change in air pressure, heard it over the rain, and it was still locked from my side, same as when he'd climbed in. I sat there a long time before I trusted myself to check the mirrors, half expecting to see him standing behind the trailer, patient as ever, waiting for me to notice. There was nothing back there, just the rain slacking off to a drizzle, the gravel lot lit up orange, and my own face, in the glass, alone, looking a lot more rattled than I wanted to admit even to myself. I told myself I wouldn't drive that detour again after dark. I have, twice since, because the freight schedule doesn't care what you saw in your own back seat. Both times I passed the turnoff for the mill road at highway speed, windows up, radio off, refusing to so much as glance toward that gap in the tree line. Both times, it looked exactly the way it's always looked, gated, overgrown, closed. But the second time, going past around the same hour, 9, maybe 10 at night, I swear the gate was standing open, not broken open, not knocked down, open, like somebody had walked through and simply forgotten, or hadn't forgotten at all, to shut it behind them. 28 years I've been hauling freight, and Highway 26 through the Mount Hood Forest is a road I could probably drive with my eyes shut, snow or no snow. I know every curve past Sandy, every grade past rhododendron, every spot where the guardrail's been replaced twice because somebody took it out in the ice. That January night, I'd already logged 10 hours behind the wheel, hauling a load of restaurant equipment up to a job site near government camp, and federal hours of service rules meant I had to shut down for my mandatory break whether I liked it or not. I liked it fine that night, The snow had been coming down since Portland, thickening the higher I climbed, and by the time I found a wide gravel turnout a few miles past Zigzag, I was ready to stop fighting the wheel. It's the kind of pullout that maybe 4 rigs could squeeze into if they had to, tucked off the shoulder with the tree line pressing in close on the far side. Thick old Douglas firs standing shoulder to shoulder like they're guarding something back in there. That night, I had the whole place to myself. No other trucks, no cars pulled off to chain up, nothing but snow falling in thick, wet sheets that swallowed my headlights whole the second I cut the beams down to parking lights. I left the engine idling for heat, same as always in weather like that. Texted my wife goodnight, like I do every single night. I'm on the road, no matter how tired I am. Told my youngest happy birthday for the following day, since I wouldn't have signal in the morning, and settled back into the sleeper, with a paperback I never got past page 10 of. I remember thinking the snow looked almost pretty against the black glass, the way it does when you're warm and don't have to walk in it. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, I heard it. My name. Just once. Called out from somewhere past the windshield, muffled by the glass and the snow the way sound gets muffled in weather like that. Flattened out and directionless. I sat up out of a half sleep, heart going a little, and did what any of us do. Told myself I'd dozed off and dreamed it, or maybe caught a stray shout from a car passing on 26 with its window cracked. But something in my gut wouldn't let it go. That same pull I've felt a few times over the years when another driver's broken down on a bad stretch and needs a hand. So I grabbed the CB, ran through the channels, asked if anybody was out there, stuck, needing help, got nothing but static, and one trucker 40 miles east, grumbling about chain requirements on the Santiam. I called dispatch too, just to be thorough, and they confirmed what the empty lot already told me. I was the only rig logged anywhere near that pullout for hours in either direction, so I told myself it was nothing. Wind, maybe, doing something strange in that stand of trees. I lay back down and tried to let it go. 10 minutes later it came again, and this time my whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Because it wasn't just my name this time. It was the way one man said it, and only one man, in 28 years of driving. My old training officer, a guy named Dale who broke me in on this exact stretch of highway back in the mid-90s, teaching me how to feather the brakes on a downgrade so I didn't burn them out by rhododendron. Dale had this way of drawing my name out low and gravelly, half annoyed and half fond, like he was always 2 seconds from either laughing at me or chewing me out. I hadn't heard that specific cadence in 9 years, because Dale's been dead 9 years, heart attack in his sleep, and I was one of 6 drivers who carried his casket. I sat there in the dark of that cab with the defroster humming and told myself, out loud, that somebody was playing a prank. Somebody with a recording, a speaker rigged up somewhere, kids messing around, anything. I called my brother, half convinced he'd cooked something up with my phone since he's the type. He hadn't. He hadn't called me at all that night, and when I told him what I'd heard, he went quiet, in a way that didn't help me one bit. I got out my flashlight then and swept it across the lot from inside the cab, across the tree line, across the shoulder, looking for a shape, a shadow, anything human-sized standing where it shouldn't be. Nothing but snow, coming down steady, and my own headlights reflecting back at me off the drifts. I told myself I'd wait it out, that a break was a break, and I wasn't moving my rig in that kind of visibility over a couple strange sounds. That's the thing about this job. You learn to make peace with a lot of noises in the night. Ice cracking, branches giving way under snow load, animals moving through brush. I've heard elk make sounds that'd curl your hair. So I made myself a cup of instant coffee off the little burner I keep back there, more to have something to do with my hands than because I wanted it. And I sat, and I waited. By the 3rd time, the voice was right against the driver's door. Not distant, not carried on wind. Right there, close enough that I could hear a specific rasp in the throat, the kind of detail you don't invent. Like the whole world was one thin sheet of steel away from whoever, whatever, was saying my name. And right alongside that, I started noticing things about my own body that scared me worse than the voice did. A dull, steady throb building behind my eyes. a heaviness settling into my arms and legs, like I'd been unloading freight all day instead of sitting still. A taste at the back of my tongue, faint and metallic, like I'd been sucking on an old penny. 28 years on the road teaches you that particular combination isn't nothing, and for one long second, I genuinely couldn't tell which threat was more real, whatever was calling my name outside, or whatever was happening inside my own skull. I forced myself to think instead of just react. I looked at the dash gauges, checked the carbon monoxide detector clipped near my bunk that I'd installed years back, after another driver's near miss got talked about at a truck stop outside Boise, and it was reading clean, hadn't so much as blinked. That should have settled me. It didn't, not fully, because the voice called out a fourth time, right on top of the third, right against the metal by my ear, like a hand pressed flat to the door from the other side, and something in me just broke past the fear and needed to know. I forced the door open into a wall of cold and snow, and there was nobody there, no shape running off into the trees, no shadow ducking behind the trailer, no sound of feet crunching away through drift, just white, coming down steady under my dome light, and the quiet hiss of my own engine idling. I stood there with my flashlight shaking in my hand and swept it across the ground in front of the cab, and that's when the second wave of cold hit me, worse than the first. The snow, fresh, maybe an inch since I'd last stepped out to check my chains a few hours earlier, showed not one single print, not a stranger's boot mark, not even my own tracks from when I'd walked the length of the trailer myself, which should have still been faintly visible under new snowfall, softened but there, the way tracks are for a while before they fill in completely. They weren't there, not a dent, not a scuff, nothing to say anyone, including me, had walked that ground in hours. And that's when the practical, cold part of my brain, the part that's kept me alive through black ice and blown tires and a jackknife outside Pendleton once, cut through everything else and gave me one clear thought. Snow builds up fast around a tailpipe in a storm like that one, packs in tight against the exhaust, and when it does, the gas doesn't go where it's engineered to go. It backs up. It finds its way in, through gaps you don't think about, through the floor, through the sleeper vents, especially in an idling truck that's been sitting for hours in one spot, while the snow keeps falling and building and sealing you in a little more with every passing minute. I dropped to a crouch right there in the open door, flashlight beam cutting through the dark toward the back of the cab, and found exactly what I was suddenly certain I'd find. A hard, packed drift jammed up tight against my exhaust pipe, half sealing it shut, built up over hours without me noticing because I'd been inside, safe and warm, breathing whatever was starting to work its way back into that cab. I cleared it with my bare hands in the cold and the dark, fingers going numb inside 2 minutes, and I climbed back in and cracked a window despite the temperature, and I did not sleep again that night, not for 1 second. I sat upright with the door checked twice and the CB on, and my phone in my hand, until the sky started going gray around 6, and then I drove the rest of that route on adrenaline and bad coffee, and didn't tell my wife the whole story until I was home 2 days later, sitting at our kitchen table, with both my hands wrapped around a mug, just to feel something solid. Months later, sitting at a truck stop outside the Dalles, I mentioned the story to an old dispatcher I've known since I started driving, a woman who'd worked that district since the early 80s and had heard just about every trucker's tall tale there is. I told it to her mostly as a joke on myself, the punchline being how spooked a grown man can get over snow and a bad night's sleep. She didn't laugh. She got quiet. Then she told me about a driver who died in that exact pullout back in 2003. Snowed in overnight on a mandatory brake, same as me. Engine running for heat, same as me. Tailpipe slowly buried under drift, same as me. Except nobody found him in time. They found him the next afternoon, when another driver pulled in and noticed the engine still idling and nobody moving in the cab. His CB mic, she told me, had been keyed open for a stretch near the end, caught on the recording that gets logged for that channel, and on it, right before it goes to silence, you can hear him calling out his own name 3 times, in his own voice, like he was trying to wake himself up out of something and couldn't quite manage it. couldn't quite claw his way back up to the surface before whatever was filling that cab pulled him back under for good. I still don't know what to make of that. If it means anything at all. If it was really him. If it was some old miswired echo of a bad night that finally found its way to me too. Or if it was just my own mind and a rising carbon monoxide level doing something strange with an old memory of a man I loved, like an older brother. I only know I've hauled freight through zigzag more times than I can count since that night, and I've never once pulled into that particular turnout again. Not in a storm, not on a clear night, not when I was so tired my eyes were burning and every other lot for 20 miles was full. I'd rather drive on empty than find out a second time whether that voice was calling me towards something, or trying, in whatever way it still could, to pull me back. I've run Highway 36 between Mapleton and Deadwood, something like 200 times. Always at night, always with the CB off, because I don't like the noise when I'm thinking. I hauled dimension lumber mostly, sometimes green chain overflow from the small mills, and that particular run, I was pulling a load of kiln-dried fir for a contractor in Deadwood who needed it on his yard by 6, so his framing crew wouldn't sit idle. Nothing special about the job, nothing special about the night, except that the fog had come in heavier than the forecast called for, rolling off the coast range in long gray sheets that swallowed my high beams about 30 feet out and gave them back to me as a wall of soft white light. There was a detour sign past the Sweet Creek turnoff, orange and reflective, roadwork ahead, standard stuff. A flagger's chair sat folded up under a blue tarp because nobody works graveyard on a coast range road. But the county puts the signs up early sometimes, gets them out of the way before the crew shows. I'd seen that set up a dozen times over the years. I took the marked bypass without a second thought. That's the part I keep coming back to, when people ask me to walk through it. There was nothing strange about taking it. My hands did what they've done 200 times, geared down, eased onto the gravel shoulder of the turn, and merged back onto pavement heading the long way around. About 4 minutes in, the bypass forked, and the left fork had a turn on it I didn't recognize. I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only thing I have to offer anybody who wasn't there. It wasn't unfamiliar, the way a new pothole is unfamiliar, or the way a fresh chip seal job throws your tires a different sound for a season. It was unfamiliar the way a room in your own house would be, if it suddenly had a door in it that wasn't there yesterday. A door with hinges that look like they've been there 30 years. I keep a laminated route sheet clipped to my visor, marked up over a decade of runs, and I checked it right there at the fork. Idling, mist beating on the windshield, faster than the wipers wanted to clear it. The sheet didn't have that left fork on it. Never had. I checked the GPS unit mounted on the dash, the fleet tracker that pings my position to dispatch every few seconds, and it didn't have it either. Just showed the gray line of the known bypass running straight through, where a turn now sat in front of my grill, plain as the hood ornament. I sat there maybe 10 seconds with my foot on the brake. Then I told myself road crews reroute things all the time. Cut a new spur for equipment access. And I took the left, because the alternative was reversing a 53-foot trailer blind in fog, with nowhere behind me to swing it. And that's not a thing you do unless you have to. The mile markers were what I noticed next, and I noticed them because counting markers is a habit from years of night driving, something to do with your eyes besides stare into gray. I passed 14, then 13, then 12, going the right direction for the detour. Nothing wrong there. Then, maybe 90 seconds later, by a clock, I checked afterward and trust. I passed 12 again. I remember checking my speed. 45. Steady. Nothing hinky with the engine. No drift in the wheel. I thought, okay, maybe I dozed for a second and looped back on myself somehow. Easy mistake on a switchback at night. Except there hadn't been a switchback. The road had gone dead straight the whole time. No bend sharp enough to double back on itself. Just fir trees standing close on both shoulders, and fog moving through them low and slow like something breathing out. That's when I looked at the GPS screen again. The little truck icon wasn't moving. Not lagging, not stuttering, the way it does sometimes on that route when the signal drops behind a ridge. It sat parked on top of the same stretch of gray digital line, while my speedometer held steady at 45. and my whole body felt the road under me. Felt every seam and frost heave in the asphalt translate up through the seat and into my spine, the way it always has. I laughed. One short, ugly sound that didn't feel like it came from me, because you don't know what your body will do with something like that until it happens to you specifically. At midnight, alone, in a machine that weighs 40,000 pounds loaded, I reached over and turned the CB on for the first time in probably a year. I wanted a human voice, any voice, somebody running the coast route who could tell me they had me on their windshield, that I existed to somebody besides myself in that cab. What came through wasn't static, and it wasn't silence either. It was a man's voice, unhurried, reading off mile markers and turn directions, word for word, the same sequence I had just driven off my own route sheet, except he read it in past tense, like a report already filed, like weather that had already happened somewhere else. Marker 14, he said. Then a pause with breath in it. Then marker 13. Came up on the left fork, took it. I sat with my hand still on the dial and didn't touch it again, because touching it felt like it would make the voice notice me back, and I did not want to be noticed. Up ahead, taillights bled red into the fog, two soft smears hanging low the way a trailer's marker lights sit. And for a second, my chest actually unclenched, because that meant another rig, another person, proof that the road still had regular traffic on it, doing regular things. I held my speed at 45, and the taillights held their distance exactly, not closing the gap, not falling back into it either, like they were welded to my own front bumper on some rod I couldn't see. I pushed up to 50. The gap stayed the same. I let off to 30. Brakes light, and the gap stayed the same again, which is the moment I understood, in a way I hadn't quite let myself understand before that whatever those lights were, they weren't keeping pace with me. They were mine, some reflection or projection thrown out ahead of my own cab that I was chasing without ever gaining on it. I pulled onto the shoulder, because sitting still had started to feel safer than moving, which is its own kind of insane thought when you say it out loud to a stranger. But it's the truth of what I felt. I got out with my flashlight, and the gravel under my boots had the exact shape of a turnout I knew, one I'd used 100 times over the years to check a load strap or eat a sandwich off the tailgate. Half buried in the blackberry canes at the edge of it, rusted through and furred with lichen, was a side mirror off an old cab-over truck, the kind of flat-faced rig nobody's run commercially since sometime in the 80s. The glass was gone, just the housing left, and the mount bracket had a shape I recognized from photographs my father used to keep in a shoebox, trucks he'd driven before I was born. I didn't touch it. I've asked myself since why not, and the closest I can get to an answer is that touching it would have made it real in a way I wasn't ready for yet, and some part of me, the methodical part, the part that logs everything, needed a minute before it let that happen, standing there in the wet with my flashlight beam swallowed up after about 6 feet. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years, a name that came up now and then around the truck stop counter when guys got tired and talky. Holt, a driver who ran this same lane for a different outfit back before my time, who called in a detour off 36 one November night on the radio and was never heard from again. No wreck ever found. No rig ever found. Just a call that cut off mid-sentence, and a company that quietly stopped assigning that route to anybody who asked too many questions about it. I'd always filed that under driver folklore, the kind of story that gets told at 2 in the morning to keep a rookie's eyes open on a long haul. Standing on that shoulder, with the fog moving wrong around my boots, and a dead man's mirror in the blackberries, folklore didn't feel like the right file for it anymore. I climbed back into the cab because the cab at least had walls and a working engine, and that's when the mile marker in my headlights caught my eye again. 12. The same 12. I'd swear to it in court. The same lean in the post where something had clipped it once. The same rust bleeding down the metal in the same pattern, like a photograph and not a coincidence. I put it in gear and rolled forward slow, and the bend came up ahead of me, the one with the old leaning fir. And I knew that tree. I'd known it for years, older than the road itself by the look of the trunk, a pale scarred strip up one side, where lightning had taken the bark off, before I was ever born. I came around that bend, and there was the tree, I kept driving, and maybe 2 minutes later, the bend came again. Same lean, same pale scar, catching my headlights the same way. Then a third time. I counted out loud, which I never do, my own voice sounding strange to me in the cab, thin and too fast. So I did the only thing that felt like it was actually mine to decide. I put the truck in neutral, set the brake, killed the engine, and sat there in the dark with both hands flat on the wheel, breathing slow on purpose. 4 counts in and 6 counts out, the way I'd taught myself to fall asleep on bad nights years ago. I didn't pray exactly, but I did something close to it, some kind of asking, though I couldn't tell you who I thought I was asking. I sat like that until the fog outside stopped moving past the windows in that low, deliberate way, and started drifting the way ordinary fog drifts, aimless, indifferent, just weather again, sitting around a stopped truck on a stopped road. When I opened my eyes, the sign for Deadwood was sitting square in my headlights. The real one, green with the corner paint chipped the way it's been chipped for years. A landmark I could have drawn from memory. The engine was running. I don't remember starting it. The dash clock read 11 minutes later than I remembered it reading, and my hands were exactly where they always sit on the wheel coming into town, like nothing had happened at all. Dispatch pulled the ELD when I checked in at the yard, and the log showed a clean 11-minute detour, matched the paperwork. Nothing flagged. Nothing anybody in an office would ever question. But the fuel record didn't sit right against the odometer. 40 extra minutes of diesel burned that the mileage couldn't account for. The kind of discrepancy that gets a note attached to it, and then gets forgotten by everybody, except the driver who lived it. Later that morning, unloading, I climbed back into the sleeper for my jacket, and found a logbook wedged down between the mattress and the wall, in a spot I never store anything. The paper gone soft and yellowed at the edges. The binding cracked. The handwriting inside was cramped and careful. A stranger's hand, and it ran the same route in the same order I had just driven it. Mile marker for mile marker, turn for turn, right up until the last entry, which stopped clean in the middle of a word at mile marker 12. I sat there a long time with that book open on my knee, before I noticed the page after it wasn't blank, the way the rest of the book was blank. There were a few more lines on it, in handwriting that wasn't the stranger's, and wasn't quite mine either, though it used my letters, my particular way of crossing a lowercase t. It picked up exactly where the old entry stopped, mid-word, and carried the sentence forward 1 line further than I remember writing anything at all. 26 years. That's how long I've been running this stretch of I-84 through the Columbia Gorge. And I want that on the record before I say another word, because I know exactly how this sounds. It sounds like the kind of story a spooked rookie invents to get out of a night run. I am not a rookie. I've hauled through whiteouts that turned the windshield into a wall of static. I've sat for 4 hours in a chain reaction on the Banfield, watching brake lights bloom red across 3 lanes of frozen interstate. I've driven through wind advisories so bad, the gorge's howl doesn't even register as weather to me anymore. It's just noise, background, the sound the world makes when I'm doing my job. So when I tell you something paced my rig for almost 50 miles that night, I need you to understand. I am not the type who spooks easy. I wasn't tired. I wasn't hopped up on energy drinks and bad talk radio. I was just driving, the way I've driven 1,000 nights before this one. It started small. It always starts small. I want to give you the shape of an ordinary night first, because that's what this was supposed to be. Ordinary. I'd picked up a load out of Portland that afternoon. Nothing special. General freight bound for Boise. The kind of run I could probably do in my sleep at this point, and sometimes half do. I'd eaten a bad gas station sandwich around Troutdale, topped off the tank, checked my tires, and merged onto I-84 heading east with the radio on low, and nothing on my mind, except the miles ahead of me, and the coffee going cold in the cup holder. The gorge in autumn is one of the prettier stretches of highway I run, cliffs rising up on both sides, the river down below catching the last light, wind farms turning slow on the ridgelines further east. It's also one of the loneliest stretches after dark, once the day trip traffic thins out, and it's just truckers, and the occasional local pushing home late. I like it that way, usually. I like having the road mostly to myself. Somewhere past Hood River, The sky was doing that thing it does in autumn out here. Dusk bleeding purple over the ridgeline, the basalt cliffs going black against a sky that couldn't decide if it was done with the day yet. I had my window cracked an inch, out of habit, the way you do when you want to hear the wind, before you see what it's doing to the trees. That's when I caught it. Movement in my driver's side mirror, up in the tree line, keeping level with my cab. Elk, I told myself. Gorge is full of them this time of year. They come down off the ridges at dusk, and truckers see shapes in the tree line all the time. I eased off the throttle, just a little, the way you do out of pure habit when you don't want to spook something on the shoulder, and it fell in with me. Not dropped behind, not lost ground the way a startled animal does. It slowed exactly with me, like we were tied together by a rope neither of us could see. I told myself I was reading too much into shadows, and 60-mile-an-hour gusts shoving the pines around like they owed the wind money. So I ran a test, because that's what 26 years teaches you to do instead of panic. I dropped from 60 to 40 and held it a quarter mile. Then I punched back up to 60. Whatever was pacing me matched both changes within a second or two of me making them. Elk don't do that. Elk panic. They scatter into the brush the second an 80,000-pound rig gets within 100 yards. They don't hold formation like they're running quality control on my speedometer. I keyed the CB, mostly just to hear my own voice in the cab, if I'm honest. It joked into the mic about something big and dumb loping along the ridge, keeping pace, probably had a screw loose. A trucker running the opposite direction came back on the channel, and I want you to understand something about CB chatter. It's rarely quiet, rarely careful. Guys joke, guys razz each other, guys fill dead air with nonsense to stay awake. This guy's voice dropped the second I mentioned the tree line. No laugh, no joke back. He asked me straight, "What mile marker are you at right now?" I told him, and he just said, "Yeah, that's about where it starts." Flat, like he was confirming a weather report. Like this was a known stretch of road, with a known problem. Something drivers already quietly agreed not to bring up on an open channel, and I'd just wandered into it without knowing the rules. Right after that exchange, my radio dropped to static. Clean. Total. No crackle in. No crackle out. Just gone. Replaced by dead air hiss. And here's the part that still gets me. It happened at the exact same spot every single time I passed through it, going forward, and then doubling back over the following minutes when I tried to raise someone else on the channel. Like the interference had a fence built around it, and I'd crossed the line into someone else's property. That's when I noticed the part that actually got under my skin. The part I still can't explain away with wind or elk or a long night. It wasn't just holding position behind me anymore. Twice. I caught it already sitting at a rise up ahead of where I was, off to the side of the road. Like it had cut across ground, no legs should be able to cross that fast. Like it knew the terrain, the folds and drops of that gorge, better than the topography should allow anything living to know it. I checked my mirrors. I checked my side windows. And there it was again, ahead, waiting, like it had never needed to catch up in the first place, because it already knew exactly where the road was going to bend. Around mile 30, I saw a shape cross the shoulder in my high beams, low and fast, there and gone into the tree line before my brain even finished processing that I'd seen something at all. I checked my mirror half a second later. Nothing. Not even brush swaying where something that size should have disturbed it. No branches snapping back into place. No rustle. No sign that anything had crossed that ground at all, except the fact that I'd seen it cross with my own 2 eyes. I did something then I want to be honest about, because it wasn't smart, but I needed to know. I stood on the Jake brake, no warning, no signal, just slammed it hard enough to rattle my thermos clean off the dash and send it rolling under the seat. I wanted to see what would happen if I broke the rhythm entirely, if I did something a semi-truck has no business doing on that grade at that speed. Whatever was out there stopped exactly when I stopped. No crashing through branches like a startled deer. No panicked animal noise. No scrabble of hooves or claws on rock. Just silence, matching my silence. And I want to tell you that silence is so much worse than any sound would have been. A sound means something alive and afraid is out there, reacting the way animals react. Silence, that matches your own silence means something out there is thinking, waiting, watching to see what you do next, the same way you're watching to see what it does. I sat there for what felt like a full minute, with the Jake brake still growling under me, engine idling rough, hazards ticking, and I did the thing you're not supposed to do out on that road at night. I killed my high beams for a second, just to see if the dark would tell me anything the light wasn't. It didn't. There was nothing out there but the wind, moving through the pines the way it always does, and my own pulse, loud enough in my ears that I could have sworn it was keeping time with something outside the cab. I eased off the brake, let the rig roll forward again, and told myself that was the end of it, that I'd spooked myself into seeing patterns in an ordinary night. I almost believed it for about 4 more miles. Then it closed the distance one more time. For about a second and a half. I've replayed that second and a half more times than I can count. My high beams caught it clean at the shoulder. It was tall, taller than it had any business being, shoulders too wide for the frame under them, standing wrong for anything on 4 legs, and wrong for anything on 2. Not a stance I could file under bear or elk or moose or man. Something in between that shouldn't exist in between. And then it was gone into the dark, like the light itself had physically pushed it back into the tree line, like it couldn't stand to be seen a moment longer than it chose to be. I didn't slow down again until Cascade Locks. My hands were shaking a little when I finally pulled into the truck stop, and I told myself it was just adrenaline working itself out of my system, the way it does after a near miss on black ice. Normal. Explainable. I sat in the cab for a minute just breathing before I climbed down. Out of habit. 26 years of habit. The kind that doesn't care what kind of night you've had. I walked the trailer before shutdown, ran my hand along the panels the way I always do, checking for road debris, checking for anything that shifted in transit. And that's when I found them. 3 long gouges in the paint above the wheel well, higher than my head. I had to reach up to touch them, and they were deep enough to catch a fingernail in, clean through the paint, down to bare metal, evenly spaced, like something had dragged 4 fingers and left 3 marks, or like something with claws had reached up in a single motion and left its signature on my trailer before vanishing back into 50 miles of dark timber. I went straight for the dash cam, pulled the card, plugged it into my phone right there in the parking lot under the sodium lights, hands still not quite steady. Wind, dark road, my own headlights sweeping the pavement, nothing else. No shape at the shoulder, no eyes catching the high beams, nothing crossing in front of the grill at mile 30, just an empty highway and the ordinary hiss of tires on wet asphalt, like the camera had spent those 50 miles looking at a completely different night than the one I'd lived through. To this day, I don't know what walked with me through that gorge. I don't know what held pace with a semi for the better part of an hour, what cut across terrain no animal should be able to cross that fast, what stopped breathing right along with my brakes. I only know it left something behind to prove to me it had been real. 3 gouges I can still lay my hand across whenever I need to remember I didn't dream it. And whatever it was, it made sure to take the only proof of what it actually looked like back into the dark along with it. I still run that stretch of I-84. I still pass that mile marker most weeks of my life. And I'll tell you the truth. I've never once heard that trucker's voice on the CB again. Not on that channel, not on any other. But every time I roll through that dead zone in the radio, right on schedule, right on the exact same stretch of road, I find myself watching the tree line anyway, just in case it's still keeping pace. I've been driving trucks for going on 38 years, and there's exactly one run I've never told anybody about. Not my wife, not the boys I trained, not the chaplain who used to ride along on the long church-run summers. I'm telling it now because I'm getting older, and some things need to be put down somewhere, instead of just living and dying in one man's head. So bear with me. I haven't practiced this one. It was January, a few years back, cold enough that fog freezes onto the mirrors before it even touches the windshield. I was parked outside Medford waiting on a load when dispatch called after 11 at night with a rush job. Small load, single pallet, an address up near Prospect off Highway 62, out on the Rogue Umpqua stretch. The pay for it was almost double what a haul that short should have gone for. When I asked why, dispatch just said the client paid extra for urgency. I'd heard stranger things than that. I took it. I pulled the address before I left the lot, the way I always do. It came back clean. Registered business, tax ID on file, GPS, dropped a pin right on a stretch of forest road I half remembered from hauling lumber out that way years before. I tried the number listed for the receiving dock, just to be sure somebody'd be there that late. It rang 4 times, and went to a voicemail box that was full. I remember thinking that was strange for an outfit that just paid double freight for urgency, but I've seen worse-run businesses turn out fine. The turnoff 62 wasn't marked. No sign, no gate, no reflector posts, nothing you'd expect leading into a receiving yard. Just a gap in the tree line the GPS insisted was the entrance. I sat there with my flashers going a good 2 minutes, deciding whether the map had glitched on me. I called dispatch back and said the turn didn't look like any business road I'd ever seen. The girl on the line pulled the account while I waited and told me this client had 6 deliveries logged over the past 4 months. All routine. All from drivers who hadn't flagged a single problem. That settled me more than it should have. If other men had gone out there and come back fine, I figured I could too. The road went from gravel to dirt to something that was barely a road at all. Branches scraping both mirrors, going a lot further than any receiving yard has business being from a highway. When I finally broke into the clearing, my headlights caught 3 structures that didn't look like any loading dock I'd ever backed into. One looked like it had been built halfway and just stopped. A single bulb burned over what I guessed was the office, and everything else sat black. No dogs, no generator hum, no wind moving through the trees, which at that elevation in January was about the stillest I'd ever heard a forest hold itself. I hadn't even got my door open all the way when a man stepped out from beside the unfinished building and said my name before I'd said a word to him. Not the driver, not "you with the truck." My first name. The one that isn't printed on any manifest or bill of lading I carry. I asked how he knew that. He said he'd been told to expect me, then named the load. Not the general description dispatch gives you, but the exact count, the exact weight, a detail about the pallet wrap I hadn't mentioned to a soul because there'd been no reason to. Then, easy as small talk, like a neighbor making conversation, he brought up my daughter's schooling, something I had never told a single person at that company in 15 years of hauling for them. That's when my hands started shaking on the wheel and I hadn't even cut the engine. I asked to see paperwork on his end, something to match what I was hauling. He just looked at me and said it wasn't going to match, and it wasn't supposed to. Whatever I thought was on that truck, he said, wasn't really what was on it. I never checked. I want to be honest about that. I never pulled the wrap back to look. I've thought a lot since about why, and the truth is, some part of me already knew I didn't want to. He told me to back up to the structure, drop the pallet, and get back on the highway, and that I wouldn't be coming out this road again. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it flat, the way you'd tell somebody the time. And something about how flat it came out told me more than yelling ever could have. While I was backing the trailer in, I caught movement past the tree line. More than one shape, low and moving together. Not animals, not the way animals move. I've hunted this state my whole life, and I know what a deer looks like breaking cover. That wasn't it. I never turned my head to look straight on. And some nights, I still think that was the only smart decision I made out there. I dropped that pallet faster than I've dropped freight in my life, and didn't look back at that clearing once on the way out. By the time I hit the highway, my hands wouldn't hold still long enough to light a cigarette. I called dispatch the second I had signal, mostly just to hear another voice, and told the night girl I'd made the prospect drop. She went quiet, then told me there was no prospect delivery on the board. Not delayed, not completed. It had never existed. She pulled the account number I gave her and said that company wasn't in the system at all, never had been, and as far as she could tell, I hadn't been dispatched anywhere since Medford. I went and dug the paper manifest out of my cab to prove her wrong, and the top copy, the one I'd have signed at pickup, wasn't in the folder anymore. Every other paper from that week sat right where it should have been. Just that one page, gone, like it had never been printed at all. I never got sent out that stretch of 62 again. I never asked to, and nobody ever offered. I still don't know what was sitting in that clearing, or what I actually handed over that night. And some evenings, hauling that same highway through the fog, I catch myself checking the tree line the way I did back then, waiting to see if something's kept pace with me ever since.